What if you wake up one morning with your phone buzzing with an odd notification? Scientists have successfully cloned a woolly mammoth. It is alive, breathing and running around a tundra somewhere in Siberia. The internet explodes. Half the world is celebrating like it's the greatest triumph in human history. The other half is horrified, quietly asking a question that nobody seems to want to answer. Should we have done this at all? That question is not just a scientific one, it is a deeply human one. And it sits right at the intersection of who we are, what we value, and what kind of world we are building for the people who come after us. This is not just a video about cloning, this is a dive into power, responsibility, grief, hubris, and the terrifying beauty of playing God. Part 1. The promise that feels too good to be true. Here is the pitch that scientists and biotech companies make, and honestly, it is a stunning one. What if extinction did not have to be permanent? What if the staggering loss of species that humanity has caused through deforestation, pollution, and climate change could simply be reversed? We could bring back the woolly mammoth, resurrect the dodo, revive the dire wolf, and restore ecosystems. Does this sound like science fiction? Well, it's not anymore. Then there is a more personal version of this technology's promise. A family loses their beloved golden retriever of 14 years, the dog that sat beside them through a divorce, a cancer diagnosis, and the loneliness of a global pandemic. For a price, roughly $50,000, a biotech company will clone that dog. They will hand back what looks like the same animal, with the same golden fur and the same warm eyes. The emotional pull of that offer is very tempting, and that is exactly why the philosophical conversation around cloning is so urgent. Because when something feels this miraculous, this wondrous, this close to magic, that is precisely when humanity needs to slow down and think. Part 2, the elephant or mammoth in the room. Here is where the story gets darker. Behind every successfully cloned animal is a shocking number of failed attempts. The primary method used in cloning, called somatic cell nuclear transfer, or SCNT. It's the same method that created Dolly the sheep in 1996. SCNT has a success rate that most people would find appalling. In many studies, fewer than 1% of cloned embryos result in a healthy live birth. Dolly was the only success out of 277 attempts. The other 276 suffered from deformed limbs, stillbirths, being born with lungs that didn't work, livers the size of fists, and bodies that aged twice as fast as they should have. Dolly herself died young at 6.5 years old, about half the lifespan of a normal sheep. She died from progressive lung disease, and she also had severe arthritis. And of those who do survive, many face what veterinarians quietly call large offspring syndrome. That is the polite term for babies born twice the normal size, with hearts that struggle to pump blood and kidneys that fail within weeks. Philosopher T.J. Kasperbauer calls cloning a practice built on the backs of silent victims. Heather Browning, who specialises in animal welfare, argues that the moral cost is staggering. Because the animals involved cannot consent and often endure pain humans would never find acceptable for themselves. The animals used as surrogate mothers in these experiments, and the failed clones who live brief, painful lives are not abstractions, they feel. And the distressing reality is that science currently demands their suffering. This discussion is not an anti-science viewpoint, as it is one of the oldest philosophical dilemmas. This is what Immanuel Kant wrestled with centuries ago when he argued that rational beings must never be treated merely as means to an end. The question is whether cloned and surrogate animals are being treated as ends in themselves, or simply as tools in humanity's astonishing ambition. Hans Jonas, a modern philosopher of technology, argued that when humans gain new powers, they must adopt a new level of responsibility. He wrote, "Act so that the effects of your action are compatible with the permanence of genuine human life." Part 3. Playing God. When someone says playing God, it is easy to dismiss it as a vague religious objection with no real philosophical weight. But strip away the theology and something genuinely profound remains. The Greek concept of hubris, which means overreaching and believing oneself above the natural order, was not just a moral warning, it was a psychological insight. When humans act as though there are no limits to what they should do simply because there are no limits to what they can do, history tends to respond badly. Author C.S. Lewis wrote something remarkable in The Abolition of Man. He warned that humanity's conquest of nature is often, in practice, the conquest of some humans by other humans, using nature as the instrument. When a corporation decides it has the right to resurrect an extinct species or clone a pet, who bears the cost of that decision? It's not the executives and not the grieving pet owners. It is the animals themselves, the ecosystems they are released into, and the communities that depend on those ecosystems. Ecological philosophers raise a concern about de-extinction specifically. There is a lab in Dallas, Texas, run by a company called Colossal Biosciences. They have raised over $200 million to resurrect the woolly mammoth by 2028. It's not a real mammoth, exactly. It's a hybrid elephant mammoth with shaggy hair, cold-resistant blood, and a domed skull. Bringing back a woolly mammoth sounds extraordinary, but mammoths went extinct roughly 10,000 years ago. The ecosystems that existed then no longer exist. Where does the mammoth go? What does it eat? What eats it? What happens when an animal engineered in a lab encounters pathogens to which it has no immunity? Or worse, what happens when it carries ancient pathogens that modern animals and humans have no immunity to? These are not hypothetical. These are documented risks that scientists and ecologists have flagged repeatedly, and they are genuinely disconcerting. Part 4. Ancient philosophers weigh in. Plato believed the soul is what makes a person unique and not the body. For him, a clone would be a hollow copy, a shadow on the cave wall mistaken for the real thing. His theory of forms holds that every living being participates in an ideal eternal form. Cloning would produce a physical duplicate but could never replicate the soul's unique journey. Aristotle believed everything in nature has a telos, which is a natural purpose or end goal. Life arises through natural processes for a reason, and those processes are not arbitrary. Cloning would violate his concept of natural generation, bypassing the teleological order built into living things. He would also argue that a clone, raised in a different environment, would develop an entirely different character, confirming that identity is not reducible to biology. Virtue, for Aristotle, is cultivated through lived experience, not inherited through DNA. Epicurus taught that true happiness comes from the absence of suffering, ataraxia, and the cultivation of simple, natural pleasures. He would evaluate cloning through a strict pleasure-pain calculus. The grief relief offered to a pet owner is a legitimate pleasure, but the suffering of failed clones, surrogate mothers, and ecologically displaced de-extinct animals? That is a vast quantity of unnecessary pain introduced into the world. His verdict: the ledger does not balance. The suffering outweighs the comfort. Confucius built his entire philosophy on the importance of right relationships, social harmony, and respect for the natural order. He would be deeply troubled by cloning, viewing it as a transgression against the proper roles of heaven, earth, and humanity. His concept of Ren, benevolence and humaneness, would demand that we treat all sentient creatures with care and not subject them to suffering for the sake of human convenience or scientific ambition. Part 5. The pet cloning problem. Now back to that golden retriever, because this is where it gets personally painful and it deserves to be handled with real empathy. Grief is one of the most fundamental human experiences. Losing a pet is not trivial. Studies in psychology consistently show that the bond between humans and companion animals activates the same neurological pathways as human attachment. The loss of a pet can trigger genuine clinical grief. So, the desire to clone a beloved animal is not shallow as it comes from a place of deep love. But here is the heartbreaking truth that philosophy forces into the open. The clone is not the same animal. It shares DNA, yes. But personality, memories, behaviour, and emotional temperament are shaped by an extraordinary combination of genetics and lived experience. They are shaped by the specific moments, relationships, and environments that formed the original animal. A clone of a gentle, wise 14-year-old dog will be a puppy with different experiences, different fears, and different quirks. The clone may look identical, yet still be, in every meaningful sense, a stranger. It's like trying to photocopy a friendship. The outline is there, but the same relationship dynamics are missing. Part 6. Celebrities that have cloned their pets. The decision to clone a pet is a polarizing one, even in the glitzy world of Hollywood. While most of us have to settle for photos and memories, some celebrities have used their significant resources to pursue a biological rerun. The legendary singer and actress Barbra Streisand revealed in 2018 that two of her Coton de Tulia dogs, Miss Violet and Miss Scarlet, are clones of her late dog Samantha. Streisand had cells taken from Samantha's mouth and stomach before she passed away at age 14. Interestingly, Streisand has noted that while they look identical, they have different personalities, reinforcing the idea that DNA isn't the sole architect of a soul. The NFL icon Tom Brady recently made headlines in late 2025 by revealing that his dog June, a pit bull mix, is a clone of his beloved late dog Lua, who passed away in 2023. Brady shared that he went through the process because of the deep bond he and his family had with the original pet. The fashion mogul Diane von Furstenberg and her husband Barry Diller were early adopters of cloning technology. They reportedly paid $100,000 to a Korean biotech firm to clone their Jack Russell Terrier, Shannon. The process resulted in 2 puppies, Dina and Evita, and von Furstenberg even named a dress after one of the clones. Part 7, the question that follows you home. Here is why cloning matters to ordinary life. This issue is a mirror held up to humanity's deepest impulses, including the desire to conquer death, to undo loss, to control nature, and to never have to say goodbye. Every major ethical question in cloning is a version of a question every person faces. How much suffering is acceptable in pursuit of something we want? What do we owe the creatures who share this planet with us? When does love become possession? When does ambition become reckless? The truth is that science gives humanity power faster than it does wisdom, and the gap between power and wisdom is where this important philosophical question lives. Part 8. Where do we go from here? In the end, why should any of this matter to a person sitting at home, perhaps with a dog sleeping at their feet? Some scientists argue that cloning could help preserve endangered species or advance medical research, and it's true that there are potential benefits. Some would also say, wait, we eat billions of factory-farmed animals every year. We test cosmetics on rabbits. Compared to that, isn't cloning a few pets or a handful of mammoths a drop in the bucket? That is a fair point. And it stings because yes, humanity has a dark, ugly history of treating animals as tools, but adding one wrong upon another isn't right. In fact, cloning forces us to confront something in addition to animal cruelty. It forces us to ask, what is the purpose of creating life in the first place? When you clone an animal, you are not rescuing a stray. You are not healing a sick pet. You are deliberately bringing a being into existence whose suffering is statistically probable, sometimes guaranteed. And that is not the same as accidental harm, that is premeditated harm, and once you see that difference, you cannot unsee it. Most philosophers who have studied this issue do not call for an outright ban on all cloning research. What they call for is something harder. They call for genuine ethical reckoning, rigorous harm-benefit analysis, and a refusal to let excitement or grief or profit override the moral obligation to minimize suffering. As humans trying to understand cloning, we need to ask both, can we and should we? And if so, under what conditions? With what safeguards? At what cost to whom? These questions are not an obstacle to progress. They are the deepest expression of it, because real progress is not just scientific, it is also moral. It is the slow, difficult, sometimes painful work of becoming worthy of the power that knowledge provides. The woolly mammoth may walk again. The grief of losing a beloved pet may one day find a biological and ethical answer. There may be a new and improved real-life Jurassic Park on the horizon. And whether humanity is ready ethically, ecologically, and spiritually to carry that responsibility with the care it demands, this is the most profound question of all. So, here is your call to action. It is not grand and it is not expensive. It is simply this. The next time you feel that ache of loss, sit with it. Do not run to science to fix it. Do not spend $50,000 on a ghost. Instead, go outside. Find something alive like a squirrel, a sparrow, or a single blade of grass pushing through a crack in the sidewalk, and realize that this imperfect, temporary, unrepeatable moment is the only real miracle there is.